Good afternoon, everyone. Switch Double here. And yes, since an early stream, and yes, it's a short one since unfortunately I had all less than 15 minutes left of the StreamYard's free plan of the until it resets. So I was like, why not to spend the rest of the few minutes I had until it resets to a new one? Well, what to do from this short stream though? I don't know. I mean, I just talk about some things that has been happening for recently. Well, like reaching 9,000 subscribers, milestone for me since I never expected that much. What else? Well, I actually have been doing some news store. Well, not say news stories, but um, mostly there are like some old stories that has been remade with new songs in the background. So yeah, it's just like that. So other than from that, and I might even not be. Uh, the next time when I stream will be actually in my new place, so that's gonna be fun. That will be around this week, actually, this weekend, hopefully. And am I scared to go out of my own place? Well, yeah. I mean, living with my family for most of my life, so it's. I mean, it's normally um, yeah. Well, normally to move out from my own place and all that. No worries, game guy. Don't worry. And this stream won't be that long, and since it's about less than 15 minutes of the stream plan until it resets until well tomorrow. Sounds like screw it. Just spend the rest of the time of the doing that. So yeah. Um. Way too tired. Well, I hear you on that, man. Well, I mean, I know what that's like since early mornings, right? So I'm not a morning person myself. I prefer to just be lazy as much I can, but sometimes you can't be that lazy, no matter what you do. So yeah, I haven't really done much today except doing some remakes of the new story, old stories, and like that. There were actually one of my subscribers pointing out that one of my stories was suddenly gone, and well, it just said that I did receive a copyright on the music in the background, and the main reason some of this, um, I don't know how many of my subscribers or viewers have noticed that several of my stories are just gone. Actually, it's because I have received a copyright on several, and I had taken them down, but they will be back on my channel but just with new background music. Even though even there is actually is another thing with it. Every time when I get the copyright, I always get an opportunity, or I say opportunity, but the option. I get the option to remove that music automatically if by choosing it. So the story will still be on my channel, but that section of the music won't be playing in the background anymore. But that is like, wait a minute, switch Diablo. If your story is still there and it's like starting the video with the music and going as far maybe halfway the story, and suddenly the music just cut off, and there's also a brief silence for maybe a minute or two in a story. There's no music, and the next near the end there's music again. Well, that is at least one of the options that I could add in it, but instead I choose to literally end to remove the story entirely and just remake them with the new songs. And there were actually even one brief time that another YouTuber that actually made music by with a music app on his phone on this person's phone, and and he actually made me some of his songs on it for me to use in my stories. And I was like, that's great. So I mean, I was grateful for that he made the songs for me that I can use. But then, not long afterwards, I did start to getting copyright on those videos. But the thing is, the music in the background wasn't from any movies, from any TV shows. That was actually made by a person who made from a music app and on his phone. So how can someone suddenly just put a claim on those music? It makes no sense. So I had, of course, the opportunity, or at least the option, as normal, to ignore or just keep doing that. But that is not that's something I wouldn't even do. Then there was also the fact that I could have fight against this claim, but not knowing how much time or the resources and all that. So, and especially financially, I probably would even stand a chance against that. So, yeah, so I decided to simply stop doing that. So I just simply remove the stories and re-uploaded them once again, but do background music. And as for the past stories for the past year or so, those stories for the background music, that is a bonus. Those stories can't be copyrighted because they are from YouTube's music library. And even though they're only instrumental music in the background, but the thing is, if I suddenly would get a copyright on those, it would have been a big problem for YouTube because they are actually uploading those uh, sounds in their own music library. Of course, there are some guidelines, there are some rules that those music could be used for the right purpose. As long as you don't violate those guidelines and rules for that. But I have never done that. I only using those background sounds in my stories only for entertainment, happiness, but it's just to spread happiness also, such as things. And I feel like, yeah, I mean, it makes sense. So, and but that was pretty much that's all of that. What's up, Alex? Yeah, not much. Um, just to be warning you, this is actually going to be a short stream, less than about 15 to 20 minutes or so, since that's all I have left of free plan of, well, for this time. But it resets to 20 hours tomorrow, so you know. Yeah, and if you don't know what that is, yeah, it's a bummer. I mean, you can actually have the StreamYard's Premium. That means unlimited time. You can stream 24/7 for a whole year nonstop without even had a break. Of course, that means then you had to pay like $25 for each per month. I mean, for you guys in America, that sounds, oh, that's cheap. But for me, whoa, no. It's not that cheap at all. $25 in my currency is like 250. Yeah, different currency, different values. Don't blame me on that one. um, but yeah, like I said earlier in the stream, though, if some of my viewers had noticed that some of my stores have been suddenly gone. Yeah, Alex, that's just, I mean, considering the value, okay, I can give you one example. Um, there seems much of the, um, well, Japanese currency, for example, say 400 million yen, what it's called, that is like $10 million. And the English pound, different currency. I mean, each country in the world has its own currency, and in the stock market it has its own value on how much it's worth. Like mainly in Europe, there are some countries that had still their own currency, but the majority had one single currency called euro. It's basically the same thing. That's value also gets up. And get this. Um, I can get this one as funny part. Uh, Several years ago, there was this big lottery in the US, and there were the highest at the time, at least, the the highest. I would say profit, but the highest prize was millions. But it was like four people had to share that prize. But the total wealth value of the money in dollars was several millions. But converted to my country's currency, it would have been 1.4 billion. Yeah, if for some reason it adds billion. So if you have 100 million in US currency and you travel to my country, that would like be a billion. So $10 is 100 over here. So 1 million is 10 million here, give or take. But of course, if the prices goes up and down, the currency, stock market and all that, but yeah, it's crazy. Because when you was a kid, you never know anything like this. And I wasn't even though as a young animal when I was in my 20s, I didn't even know anything about it. I mean, I never paid much attention to it. But as I getting older, I learned about it, and it's shocking. It is. It's quite understanding how. I mean, I had always assumed that every country in the world had the same value of the currency, but there was only two times in history that most of the value of currency dropped quite significant, and that is 1929, the first financial crashes, and then also 2008, 2010. That was another one. During those two time periods, there were millions of people around the world that suffered most of it. Many people lost their jobs, and especially in 1920s to 1930s, what many Americans are known for, that's the Great Depression. Like many Americans who had many jobs suddenly lost it. Many Americans at the time, they went to drastic measures to make sure they can keep their families fed with anything. Many try to find any solutions, like try to find other different types of jobs that were, even though maybe it was slower paid compared to their old ones. I mean, it's understandable, but some people went as so far to literally go into as to smuggling, like moonshining. And since that time, there was also like no booze, like no alcohol was even allowed. But the mafia, or many as regular people in the South or basically anywhere, tried anything to make sure that they can be selling alcohol illegal and get paid for that, even though they knew that it was a big risk. There's always there was always the risk that they could be caught, and not only just not men. They also be they also that this could not only been adults. They could also have been their sons. Could also been part of this moonshining back in the 30s. That the sons could have been the drivers in the getaway vehicles, or they could have been the ones smuggling the alcohol or moonshine into bars and all that. It's, as you said, desperate times calls for desperate measures. It is like I know this is actually another. This is another part of American history, but it's much darker. Back in the 1800s, this was before California and other states were even part of the Union, when it was still part of Spain or that. But as many Americans traveled west, there was one party called the Donner Party. I don't know how many Americans know about this particular one. It's it started as fairly relatively peaceful. They traveled out west, but a small problem is that they left way too late. But then another small issue they had that they followed this guidebook, or like a it's like nowadays you have these traveling brochures, like they have a map on it, that there's some information where like which way to go and all that. But this book that they had was written by a con artist, and this con artist had no idea because he never traveled that route at all. But the family, or the families, there were like I think it's there 20 or 30 people at the time. They came to this crossroad. There are two ways. The right, um, the left one was were taking you. They were taking them straight, closer through the Sierra Nevada mountains. But the right ones were taken through the mountains, and that where the first problem started. They were end up in a fight among some people among the men in this traveling party. Eventually, one of them ended up being shot to death. So they decided to take the right path instead of the left, and they made a poor choice on that one. You will understand why. As they traveled along the right path, they soon came along the Sierra Nevada mountains in. Excuse me a moment. Excuse me about that. It's my dad calling for dinner is ready, but I'm not really particularly hungry. But like I said, the people travel along the dirt path, no, sorry, along the mountains. But the thing is, um, no, my girlfriend is actually in America, and I'm actually in Sweden. Different countries, you know. Yeah, and even though is not feeling well lately, she has been sick with the flu for the past few days. Yeah, so I had personally, I had even had the flu in a couple of years, and I had never even been vaccinated for the flu for several years either. I just hadn't even get that. But at this story of the donor, yeah, no worries. But like I said, this donor party, well, they travel for the mountains. They arrived in a bad time. The weather suddenly changed. It was they were supposed to be leaving in early spring, but they ended up leaving in late autumn. They were stuck in the mountains for throughout the winter. And the thing is, they started to have they did have uh, they had some supplies with them along the way, but as they traveled and as they were stuck in the mountains throughout the entire winter, they were just ran out of supplies, and eventually they only had one solution left. So desperate measures, desperate times, or as Alex said, desperate times call desperate measures. As a donor party, had supplies with them during their travel to the West Coast. But but as they were stuck in the Sierra Nevada mountains, the supplies dwindled, and soon they went to a much darker approach: cannibalism. Yeah, they did. They actually as much as to start cannibalism in order to, they literally cooked, like frying the meat from the companions. Um, but there was one man, elderly man. He didn't die from that. He died from exposure. He became blind of the winter apparently, and not every one of the people died during this dinner party, because in the early spring, or early that year, after they became stuck in the mountains, they sent off some people to hope to find help anywhere else. Luckily, they did. They managed to find a small, I would say a farm, more like a ranch, kind of. They were able to find help. So there were several men. They traveled to the direction where they been told where the other survivors were, and they were actually managed to get help. But one single man itself, he found he was heartbroken. Not because but the people desperate, they started eating their dead companions, but there was so many young children. He carried at least 4 or 5 along with him. And he said if he had the strength enough, he would have taken all of them with him. And eventually the survivors was managed to taken to the nearest town and survived. But one of the men who survived, he he couldn't stand living in a small town or in the civilized civilization anymore. Not because that he was a criminal or anything, like just the act of what he did made him, he couldn't stand himself living, he couldn't forgive him what happened. So he went back in the woods to live as a hermit throughout his life. And this is one of the dark periods in American history. And it's probably not well known as another dark period in American history, which is taking place many years later. That one is known as a Civil War. Uh, yeah, kind of like self-exile. I would think that what you consider. But there is another similar story to this, where people was trapped in the mountains and they were forced to eat their dead companions. But this was actually not in America. This was in Paraguay, the South America. I don't remember, in the Andes, the Andean mountains. This was actually in 1972, if I remember right. They were actually this rugby team. They were they were actually on a plane, and they were traveling to this competition they were going to take a part of. But unfortunately, the plane crashed, but they survived. Not all of them, but they were eventually saved near the end. But not all of them. I think it was 12 or 14 that managed to survive. And this was actually made as a movie. And the movie is called Alive. I've seen it. And every country in the world has their dark times. And especially like in the US when that donor party. But the other most well-known dark period that most Americans really want to forget. And that happened between, well, technically it happened well before this. But it happened during from the, say, 1850s all the way to 1860s, prior and during the Civil War. And that was another thing. Some of the American, some of the slaves, they, yeah, it's slavery is one of the worst, one of the dark ones in there. But Americans were not the only ones that committed in slavery. I mean, Sweden also did perform slavery throughout some part of the 1800s and even as many centuries before them. Like the ancient Vikings, they did a lot of slavery. In fact, but there was also that in Sweden there were actually also people that could sell themselves freely to slavery. They but the slaves they could buy themselves free in like in Roman Empire. If there was if they managed to buy them free from slavery, they would have been an automatically a Roman Empire citizen. But in Roman Empire, that's slaves. If a slave could read and write, the owner wouldn't even let them go with that easily because they were more value of anything else. But in America, well, there were at times that American slaves that could buy themselves free from slavery, and they traveled and settled down in other Canada that inhabited slavery, or in the northern states like New York and all that along the border. But there were times that slavers from the South could travel all the way to the northern states, captured the free slave, and bring them back to slavery. And there were actually even some slaves that couldn't travel. Free slaves could go back in the South. And even though they had documentation, the papers to prove them, they bought themselves free. But some slavers, those papers were complete useless. Like they wasn't even worth at all. So they can't just simply bring that person back to slavery. And and even though back in the 1800s, like in the slavery times or in the Civil War era, it was like the slaves were the African Americans basically had no rights at all. Even though but they were living in the plantations. The slave owners they didn't provide them with food or anything. The only they did provide us with small shacks, small buildings that they can live in. And they were even allowed given a small patch for a small ground to grow their own food. And yeah, it was just dark times for them. Many slaves died. And in fact, yeah, who knows? I mean, topic changes all the time, but you know, slavery is for the people that had slaves in their possession. They could beat them as much as they wanted. They could even kill them without even being arrested, because to them, African Americans at the time were was just property. They even had no single rights at all. But yeah, it was dark times, and it was just yeah, it's just many Americans they want to forget this, but some they don't want to do that. They want to keep the memory part alive. And another thing is, but even after the Civil War was over, the African Americans now the slavery was completely abolished in the whole United States. But the southern states that had left the Union, they were only a couple of years later when they went back to be part of the Union. And it's just that even though after the Civil War, there was still over a century later when most of the African Americans became part of the system as were considered as citizens. Because in the from the 1950s and all this throughout the 60s, African Americans, they were actually allowed to go to school and all that. But here's the thing: if they were to go to store, they were only allowed to go to stores that were only allowed for black people. And they were in if they were in the park, if they wanted to drink some water from the water fountain, they had to drink from just one that was made for African Americans, not for white people. And if they were on the bus, if a white person wanted to sit there, the African American would have to stand up and leave the privileged seat for the white person. No matter how much they try to argue, they were being arrested. That actually happened once that I know of. Her name was Rosa Parks. She was on the bus, and this white person wanted to sit in the bus seat that she was sitting in, but Rosa, she refused. She was an older lady, and eventually, Joe, she was arrested for standing against the white people. But it marked the beginning of the freedom of the human rights movement. But the thing is, even in schools, the classes was divided. Only white people had white teachers. African Americans would have African American teachers and all, and etc. That was divided for a long time. And you may think, oh, this is over by now. Far from it. Far from it. Yeah, I mean, history has always been a huge part of my interest. In fact, I read a lot of history. But I mean, even for African Americans back in that time frame, even now, they're still being considered as bad guys. I mean, many police can actually arrest many black men or black people or African Americans for no stupid reason, for accusing them for doing something which they hadn't even done. Not only African Americans, but also Hispanic people can also be harassed, Asian people. And not about that, the Asian people, well, the Asian people during the World War II era, during the war that was going on, many Asian people actually were taken to camps. Like, those camps were had barred wires around them. They weren't like only in our, but when I was saying Asian, there were Japanese, Chinese, Filipino, or no matter what, especially people that have been living in, especially they were mostly Japanese. Well, the reason were since Japan attacked Pearl Harbor in 1941, and there were a lot of distrust or mistrust uh, between Japan and America at the time. And yeah, there was like not several hundred or a few thousands. There was several hundreds of thousands. No matter, I mean, they put any Asian in those camps. There were no, but they weren't anything that they were exterminated or anything. They just put them into camps. To They treated any Asian as, you know, as a potential spy for the Japanese Empire. But eventually, after the war, it all was gone. So, I mean, it just all happened, and it's pretty dark. But I mean, it's understandable that some people back then were considered to be, well, and all. I mean, it's like back in the that kind of reminds me of the distrust for, like, say, the Incas Empire in the South America in Peru. Before in the 1500s, when the Spanish came there, the same thing. They were considered gods because they had horses that were wearing gold, metal plated armor and all. But after one particular Inca emperor or king was captured, one of the Spanish demanded that only way for their king to be released alive if they filled the room with gold and silver. They literally filled the room gold and silver. But the problem is, the Spanish backstabbed them. They double crossed. They executed the king anyways. It was just heartbreaking. And that empire didn't even last more than 100 years. Or even not even 100 years. It just like another thing. Prior to the Spanish arrival in the New World, there were, I think it was 40, around 40 million people native in Central America. But in the beginning of the 1600s, they were like, I think it was like between 1 or 2 hours, like 1 or 2 millions left. Oh, yeah, that's yeah, I have the tendency to talk on and not even notice. But the first time I, the first time when I realized there was 20 hours, and the first time when I was passing through that, continue beyond, even though I had maybe an hour left one at a time, and I was just talking for nearly 2 hours, and I was like, wait a minute. I was since I remember this, like I had only like maybe just 1 hour left, and I when I really noticed that I had been talking with my friends for nearly 2 hours, I thought, wait a minute, I surpassed that by an hour, and I thought at the time at least that the stream would automatically shut down of itself, well, it end itself, but it didn't. So yeah, but I probably should end the stream here anyway, since and but yeah, it's gonna be interesting to see the next stream next time will be Friday, I think. Let's go see here. Come on, that would be Friday would be 14 and 15. Yeah, probably like the 14 and 15 would be a stream. But I don't know if some of my friends like Game Guy will probably would join the instance. He is currently moving to a whole new state. So yeah, and even I have been moving. Well, I mean, I have my own place, but just there are still some things that needs to be moved over there. So yeah. Well, Alex, that was an interesting stream from currency to dark slavery and all that stuff. Oh man, it's just yeah, it's as it is. Well, I should probably end here anyway. So well, everyone, it's been been an interesting stream for now. So and as always, this is Diablo signing off. Bye everyone.